Start streaming. Seriously. All right. Making a new streaming. We have like three now, so we'll have to delete the old ones. Oh, jeez. Yeah. Right. That's true. Um, yeah. All right. So we are live. All right. Cool. Um, all right. Hopefully you can hear me now, and that's all good. So, do we want to read the premise again? Sounds good. Yeah. And before the powers that be, um, so rudely cut me off last time. Um, um, I did want to bring up the reason I was also like felt like I wanted to have this conversation was a quote that I read from Malcolm X. Not read, actually, I saw him in an interview, and he said the only way we solve issues on race is if people from opposite sides of the table, a white man and a black man, are able to get together and speak freely without hurting each other's feelings. Not that they're trying not to, but without being afraid to hurt each other's feelings. And so we can bring the issues that are under the rug out on the table and find a logical solution to those issues that are that we can see and both identify. So that's what motivated me, and I hope to see if we can have a good rational discord on the facts. Um, and Yeah, so do we want to start with the I guess the rebuttal or the response I would have to said post, or okay. All right. I guess I want to start by framing that discussion alongside the when I first saw the post. I felt that it it made it so that the discussion, I think we both agree, police brutality, violence, anybody who's given a monopoly on violence, like legally, and then abuses it, has to be, um, uh, rebuked, right? They have to be admonished and said, this is wrong. We Right. So I think we do agree with that. And so this discussion, while important, I hope I think the big reason why a lot of people had a negative reaction to it is also because it seems to kind of straw man and like take the spotlight off of the police situation. But you have agreed that this is a problem, and the fact is that there is a problem also in the black community, which is more pertinent. And I would have to agree with you there. Definitely, there is a problem in the black community that causes a lot more black lives lost in the grand scheme of things. Now, I think my argument would essentially want to premise on how that was also caused by a lot of the culture and the practices going into law enforcement and all around the system that led to this situation, which is of my belief. 1960s, I said, was a flashpoint, and that's a flashpoint in just the whole destiny of which way the United States went. Actually, also starting from the 50s, um, to where the United States starts flexing its position on the global stage, as kind of the world police and getting in matters. Um, People are coming back from war, especially African Americans having served their country in 1945 and coming back to the 50s and seeing that they were almost treated better in Nazi Germany, right? Jesse Owens, who ran, in Summer Olympics and won medals in Germany, said that Hitler never dissed him. He never actually said anything. He never mistreated him or snubbed him. That's what his words were. He was never snubbed by Hitler. But even after winning this competition in representation of the United States, his president wouldn't even acknowledge him. Like he wasn't invited to the White House, and his accomplishments weren't acknowledged. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is Black people are coming back and having a greater feeling of injustice and a greater feeling that they are treated as secondhand citizens, second class citizens in the United States, and start pushing for more civil change, especially through the 50s and going on into the 60s. A lot of empowerment movements are come down, start happening. Now, at the same time, the hippie movement's going on, right? And we have the whole situation with Russia, with the Red Scare. So this is the second Red Scare because there was a 1919 situation about the first time the Bolsheviks came through, right? And now that the Soviet Union has established itself in opposition to the United States, as these are the two global powers here, and we have nuclear arms in the race. The stakes are very high now, and the civil rights movements seem prime for um, infiltration for the Soviets, right? So this is where we get clandestine programs that start occurring in the United States as a response to prevent any kind of foreign intervention, whether it be the civil rights movement of black people, but also even action was taken to vilify the hippie movement, right, and classify them as dangerous a dangerous element of society, right? So we have exactly. So we have a vilification of drugs, which also plays in part because black people were smoking weed, right? That was, where it wasn't such a big deal then. Right. So I would actually like to preface this as that the the real reason that maybe blacks and out group communities were so cracked down upon was that the people in power saw it as a national security concern, not even just because these groups are aligning themselves with socialist ideas, right? You talk about the Black Panthers, you talk about hippies and hippie communes, all that stuff is going socialist. So it's also not like a lot of people aren't trusting that these are um, really grassroots, like coming from the American people. But even then, what if the Soviets take advantage of this and take over, you know. So a lot of very drastic measures were taken and things that have had a lasting impact. Um, an example of this has to be the MK Ultra program, which which now has been exposed to the fact that the government was using LSD to experiment on its own citizens to try and bring out violent. Um, I think the express um, uh, goal of it was to create a person who would act violently and then not have any recollection that they did such, and change their personality. Um, and a lot of people, I don't want to get too much into conspiracy because that um, so much is not known about the MK Ultra program. But what we do know is that these things happened, and a lot of weird programs were going on behind the scenes against both groups, civil rights groups, Black Panthers in particular, and the hippie movement, and any white people who would feel kind of sympathetic to those causes. All of those groups were targeted, and by doing this, you even think about what happened with JFK. Like the '60s were a mess. Like what the heck? Presidents were getting assassinated. The president of a leader of the Black Panther Party was shot point blank in a raid in which there was no probable cause in his bed as he slept by an officer, right? And no charges were brought up. There was all this stuff going on, and a lot of it was justified in the name of national security. And part of that has to be juxtaposing these groups against each other, because if these groups unite, it would be very difficult to, if they want to go socialist, this is a democratic country, right? And um, a similar story happened in, I heard, I might get this city wrong, Wilmers, North Carolina, or Williamsburg. I might have to look that up, but I had just learned recently that there was a white supremacist group that had overthrew their, I think it was in, this was before these, and I'm using this story to just show how more it was so that these elitist groups or people in power felt like their grip on power was loosening, and so they had to resort to these very underhanded illegal means to control not only black people but also any people of who would be sympathetic to the cause. In Wilmers, I'm just going to call it Wilmers, North Carolina, what happened was, um, right. What happened was poor white people and the black community got together, right? Because white people were not getting the right opportunity. It was kind of like the situation in which there wasn't many social institutions in place to make sure rich white folks don't just abuse, like the whole industrial revolution, just work all day, no protections for your health, etc. So they got together and said, look, this is a bad situation for both of us. The Democratic Party at that time was the party of the white supremacists, especially in the South, right? So black Republicans, poor white people, get together and vote and create a voting bloc that sees both poor white people and black people go into office and take office as mayor and take control of the town, right? And the white Democratic Party, that Democratic Party saw this as like, how are we going to combat this? And what they resulted to doing was they started feeding propaganda to vilify black people against the poor whites and say like, well, they're going to rape your white women. You're just not going to defend your white, and created this division, right? And um, ultimately, they use voter intimidation, right, to prevent the next time that these positions um, were up for reelection. They used voter intimidation to prevent black people from voting. They used the propaganda to make it so that if you vote this way as a white person, you are somehow, making it so that it's okay to rape your daughters, or I don't know, right? So they created this division, and once they got their people into power, they didn't even take it, they didn't leave it there. They arranged a coup d'etat. Like, you can look this up. It's actually on Vox too, Vox. a, the This group of people basically forced the mayor to resign, and they put in their own mayor, and also, right. Well, I don't. Oh well. Oh, you're talking about Seattle. Yeah, the thing that's going on there is crazy. Right. But I think I just don't want to take off digress too much. But that's just showing that it there was this power structure that actually created to exacerbated relation problems, divided people, and took advantage of it nefariously. So we have programs like MK Ultra, which lead into COINTELPRO, which lead into the Iran Contra scandal. Drugs come into the black community, right? The black minority is always used as a scapegoat, right? To kind of introduce these negative elements, and also turn the public opinion against movements uh, that otherwise were peaceful. Say, I think the Black Panthers and a lot of rights have been misrepresented in a lot of the things that a lot of the social programs that that they did in the Black communities, right? And because of this, it's led to this situation of whenever Black people even try to organize, it seems like the unseen hand of the government, or whether these organizations will come down and institute and implement policies that end up destroying the community, that end up putting people into very negative circumstances. So I think it has to also be a top-down policy thing where um, you, in these cases, I'm saying these law enforcement agencies. Well, I don't know about the CIA and the FBI, but they played that. We know the FBI was wiretapping Martin Luther King was engaged in all this stuff against all the civil rights leaders, right? So there was all these state sanctioned programs are coming from enforcement agencies that end up derailing a lot of any progress that was done here, whether they felt like it was justified or not. We cannot just say the ills in the black community are are a result of something innate in themselves, because we know there has been successful black communities in the past. Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is Black Wall Street, which had millionaires, black people there, and had a very affluent black community. Like, this stuff is possible. What happened to it? It was air bombed and leveled by by a riot that happened with the so yeah, the shoe shiner, yeah. Yeah, the white mob, as far as the information I had, was that they were demanding that they lynch the suspect too, which obviously that's extrajudicious justice, and I don't think the girl even pressed charges, but that's neither here nor there. Some clash led to a destruction and leveling of a whole city, um, which is definitely, oh yeah, I remember you. I will rest my case on this last statement is that the reason why I feel like bringing up statistics like this um, kind of doesn't really help is because um, it like even if the statistics are true, which I wanted to bring up a counterpoint to that later when we get to it, it's almost like you're saying, it's almost like trying to make the argument that there's something inherently wrong with Black people or they're inherently violent. Look at the statistics, it's their own fault, right? Whereas I think the situation now, looking at it more of in a historical context of what has been happening consistently, and a lot of grandparents and a lot of even parents. I don't know if you saw the Dave Chappelle thing that he just dropped. I recommend you kind of see that, and he talks about how his great grandfather um, had participated in an event. But a lot of these things are pretty like a lot of people. There's still a survivor as of last 3 years of the Tulsa bombing. Like that's insane. Is that like there's somebody who remembers that who lives and draws breath still. So these things didn't happen a very long time ago, and these things are still felt, right? So it we find ourselves in a situation in which we find maybe a dog that's vicious, right? And we try to be like, this is just a bad dog. This is a vicious dog. But we don't realize that the dog has been abused for a very long time, and we try to blame the dog for its its this the situation right now. That that it's just inherently something wrong, like a pit bull, right? Like there's something inherently wrong with pit bulls, and they just want to attack everything. Whereas that's not the case. Its owner was beating the shit out of it. No wonder it's aggressive, right? It had to be that way to survive. So I think in that case, we have to, you know, We have to look at things in that perspective of like, these statistics, what are they trying to say, right? We agree that there is a problem now, and there has been a role that's been played by police to exacerbate this problem as well. So, how do we move forward? What are the answers? I don't think it's blaming the black community for violence and being like, well, you guys are just something wrong with you guys. That I think that would be the main point that I would say on the whole 1960s case. It brings up a lot of precedents for where we are. Yeah, yeah, I did. I would I would like to ask you on that statistic. Is there any way we can find out? Because I was considering that. Okay, if black people are more likely, or black males especially, are more likely to be in an interaction with uh, a police officer, does the data show that the police officer is, in the incidents that a killing occurs by a police officer, does it happen at the same rate as a police officer being involved in a case with a white person, right? So there's two violent cases, whether one is with a white person and the other one is with a black person. Is the chance of the two people getting killed equal, or is it not? Are black And that's kind of why I wanted to know, given any, if there was a way to be like, given any violent crime, if the perpetrator is white or black, who has a higher chance of surviving, or a higher chance of being killed, I suppose. Um, because I don't know, in my head I'm getting confused as if these numbers should be as expected given the representation of how many white people there are versus black people. So I was wondering, in if we could isolate in a violent case, when there is a violent case, if the person is black, how likely are they to be killed versus if they are white. Um, so the amount of deaths that occur by police um, in a population, can that be correlated? I mean, are those the same? Am I ask? Are those? Is that a good statistic to answer my question, or is there some confounding factors in population size which might attribute for a lower or higher incidence in any given population? The interpretation, I will attack that one point about the source, because it has always bothered me about these statistics as well, that they come from a party that is involved in the question, right? It's like if I punch you in the face and then you ask me what happened and you disregard what he said, right? So I had, in preparation for this, just seeing like, does this happen? Has there been incidents of this? I think the New York Times had reported back in the Summer Olympics of 1996 that they found the Atlanta Police Department consistently underreported crimes for years to make the city look safer, right? So if that sets a precedent that law enforcement um, will cook statistics in order to push any kind of agenda, then it makes me, I'm not completely refuting the data, but it makes some of the points that come up in the data kind of seem a bit dubious to me, when it seems like, okay, well, black cops are killing more, um, or black people are not being killed as much as you would have it believe. Well, I'm like, well, who did you ask? Did you ask the cop? You're right. You asked the cop if he killed somebody? Oh, no, I didn't kill him. What did they say with George Floyd? He died of natural causes. That wasn't my knee. Are you kidding me? Like, if there's nobody checking them on this, it might have been, if nobody was putting the spotlight on George Floyd, it might be that, oh yeah, he just died of natural causes, and the whole situation gets swept under the rug, which so I did want to bring that point to be like, hold on a second, the statistics here might be skewed in a certain favor, because back in the day with Joe Biden, and why I don't like this guy either. I just want somebody to run independent. So my God. Anyways, is because he used these same statistics. These same statistics are being used to justify militarizing and adding hundreds of thousands more police on streets, right? What's gonna happen? Like, are incidents gonna rise? Are tensions gonna rise? Probably. Ye- Right. And were these statistics true, or were they, a thing that was used to justify creating more jobs, or creating, this kind of job in particular? I'm not sure. I don't know. I just wanted to bring into the, that point that these things can be used for political means. Right. Oh yeah, it's a habit from being a remote worker. Right, the proximity argument. For sure. And I think it is important, I think, for these discussions to occur. And the reason why I think this is important because people are usually scared to bring up that, right? To be like, well, black on black crime, guys, like what do we do about gangs? What do we do about gang violence? What do we do about the situation in our cities? And I do think that this is a legitimate thing, right? Unfortunately, it's people like the only people who say this stuff is like Candace Owens, in which she's like, well, police brutality doesn't happen at all. And I'm like, all right, now you just ruined any goodwill that you could have. But these are discussions, right? But these are discussions that are relevant, and because yes, there is a very highly publicized and glorified aspect of our culture, which which glorifies being a violent person, a violent thug, and etc. Right? And these things need to be addressed. And what I fear for Black people is that we put the blame too much on external circumstances when ultimately, and I know this, ultimately it's going to be us who have to liberate ourselves, right? We're going to be the ones who have to change the mindset and be like, okay, in the past this has happened to us, but we can't wait for somebody to give us something, right? In the same way I'm able to, because I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in 90s New York, where crime was insane. This is like after the crack epidemic, in the middle of it, right? I couldn't play in my yard. Like I played in my like porch. That's it. Like there was no going down the street. My parents would, you know, go crazy. But the fact that the only thing that was different is that I had parents that encouraged me and gave me a different perspective, and I had different information and a different trajectory of who I thought I was and who I thought I could be. Whereas when I'm going through school, the prevailing culture, a lot of my Black peers, is that it's not cool to be in an advanced class. It's not cool to, so this is a culture, right? I'm being called white, right? Out there like, well, you're just right. You're being too white. Yeah, exactly. Right? Because I was doing well. And then I'd always be like, well, is how is that is intelligence now correlated with right, exactly. And that is something that has to be, kind of put on the forefront, and then we have to give credit and glorify the members in the Black community, and there's many of them, right? um, that have accomplished a better life for themselves outside of just being a basketball player and just being, or being a rapper. And I don't want to downplay those because those guys hustle too, but there's other avenues and ways to express that Black people have to be aware of. And I'll always put that one of the most transformative experiences I had was going to Africa when I was 18 and seeing that Black people are not a monolith, right? And going to a Black rock concert. Like these guys are playing death metal in Africa. These guys love, this is Kenya. So these guys love raves, and they just listen to EDM. That was not true. I grew up sagging my jeans, listening to hip hop, and anything that was different meant that I wasn't being Black, right? And beside that's how I thought. It was like, oh, well, that's white people music, right? And then when I go see a different way that Black people can exist, I definitely came back a lot more transformed. I like a lot of different music now. I like country. I would have never said that before. Like I was like, well, you know what? If it's good, it's good. That's not an identity thing. I'm a person, first of all, right? And and so I think it is important to bring up these things and put up like n- not a judgmental way. And it's difficult for a white person to bring up statistics like this and be like, but guys, and because it's going to be taken negatively. But yeah, right. And I'm sure that's not your intention of just being like, there's something wrong with you guys, but also being, um, but also, we have to be honest with ourselves. is there a toxic element in the way, in our beliefs, in the way that we believe that Black people should be in as an identity, right? And a lot of these things like will play into a lot of what happens with cops, etc. I understand that. I also understand the historical context that brought us here. But for me, I'm like, I acknowledge that, look, this isn't these things aren't saying like there's something wrong with Black people and you guys, the genetic thing, because that's what a lot of people with worse intentions try to use these statistics for, but rather as a way to be like, look, yes, I was talking to my buddy and I'm like, and we're both Black, and I say, um, even if we solve this police thing, even if we make sure police have freaking dominators from Psychopaths and they can't shoot like unless the AI tells them that this is lawful, right? is it is it going to change, the mindsets that prevail in the streets? You know what I'm saying? Is it going to change Memorial Weekend being so freaking bloody in Chicago, right? Sure, we can talk about all the things that led up to this point, but at some point we have to take actions to solve these problems in legitimate ways. And I'm not sure how to do that. And I'd love, but to acknowledge we have a problem is definitely gonna be important. Like you have to do it, and you won't get better unless you know there's a problem and we can try things for sure. Yeah. I just sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I would agree with that definitely, because I mean a lot of people perceive it's like I've always justified it to my parents because and like, why do you listen to rap music? It's blah blah, because they're a lot of older black people feel like that way about, rap music. And it's I've always more considered it as like you watch violent movies, right? We watch we watch Tom Cruise do we watch, yeah, right? John Wick, and he's killing people here and there, but we don't, go and right. There's all types of movies, but it's a purport. This is art, right? This is art, and that's the way I tend to look at it generally. But the fact that rap is a bit more visceral because the roots come from, real things that were happening in the community, especially back then. Now it's become commercialized and bubble gums, like I cop a new Uzi, like it's just shit that you say in a rap, right? And that's where it's gotten to. But the original place where it came from was very real, and a lot of people saw it as just like stories from the environment, the streets. Um, now, right, right, right. We we also have to look at the part that white America ends up playing in this, though. Even though it's a small minority of black people who represent like a violent gang culture, right? Um, it ends up even leaking to the suburbs. And I say this just growing up in the black experience of places where we don't necessarily even need to be being in a gang or whatever, but we do it. It's almost like a play thing because it's cool, right? And right, and I would say that comes from a lot of the media, and it's like this is, and I told some of my white friends that 70% of rap sales are white people, right? So if you look up the numbers, it's white people consuming this. Then in the market, it becomes in demand. This picture of this black person who's a thug and a gangster. When I went to Andover, when I moved there from Brooklyn Park, people were expecting that from me. They're like, "Oh, you're gonna be this kind of guy," because that's how we've been socialized to think black people are. So they were right. So I brought this up in just that the socialization of both me and a white counterpart is this image, and you can look at all the films and the media that have been put out since like black exploitation films, 70s, all the way up through the golden age of rap, the media that's being pushed and the image that's being pushed, the roles that are available for black actors were of a particular kind. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I saw. That's why I acted a lot of the things I acted. I felt like this is my role in society, right? Right. And it was only until I started seeing counterpoints and counter examples, I started getting exposed. But I wasn't seeing it on TV. I have to fucking find a book to find out about Ben Carson. I have to read in a book to find out about Booker T. Washington. And no one is really putting this at the forefront of media. now I think things are getting better. I know things are getting better, and now you can have black celebrities and black roles in which are empowering to the youth. But I think these things are taking time, and it's an identity thing. I know because I lived through that. Despite having very positive influences from my parents, I I definitely engaged in a mindset of like, maybe I should join a gang. Maybe I should be down with these guys and do these things. I should, not. I should behave in a certain way that is expected of me, both from my black peers and from my white peers, right? Because this is the role black people. I'm not black enough, right? Before I realized that that's not the truth. It's like this the definition of blackness had to be in this specific monolith, and if I wasn't being like that, I've somehow um, betrayed the culture, right? I've betrayed this and that. um, so that as much as we want to downplay that role, me living this life and knowing that, yeah, I was there. I was in Brooklyn Park running around looking for trouble because I thought that's cool, right? And it does play into it. And I had friends who had that same mindset, even though we lived in Brooklyn Park. This wasn't Harlem where, like, it wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. You know what I'm saying? But because of the socialization and mindset, we thought this is what it means to be a cool black person. You hoop and you don't take shit from nobody. You know what I'm saying? So that goes to a lot of the socialization. And while this stuff is happening, I also, as much as I know, the police situation is relevant because it has happened to me, and I was at Andover and just doing backflips and stuff with some friends. I had like 3, 4 black people there, and we got the cops called on us for nothing. That's too many. The canine unit showed up with like 4 people. I was with my friend Patrick Connerton, and the police sat us down and they didn't talk to us. They talked to our one white friend. Like, what's going on here? What are these kids? Do you know them? Are they with you? They said nothing to us. They didn't talk to us, take any statements. Once Patrick told them everything's fine, then they left. What the hell? Like, like these things happen, and no one can tell me that. How do you get that statistic? Yeah, that's Is that, what are you guys doing? Do you belong in this community? Because that's yeah. If there was no positive influence, regardless of how smart I am, I probably would have just given into the ignorance because that's what's around me. And a lot of my friends growing up did, even though I could tell that they're smart. Like we have conversations, and I'm like, wow. But since they lived in a culture and an environment that pushed this image, that's the way that they went. And it is definitely, what does J. Cole says, no role models, you know what I'm saying? No role models, and I'm still here. um and I hope. Right. Hmm. And we can say that for a lot of groups that have been oppressed, even Jewish people, where it is, I think what guides them is that strong, solid identity, right? They know who they are and they know what their worth is, and that always ends up putting them back, where they see themselves. Um, I think you can even look at, black people in the United States are just viewed as black people, but there's obviously Africans, there's people who come from the West Indies, there's all types of different groups. And if you look at the most successful of those groups, the Nigerians, most, so many of them are doctors, right? They're doing very well for themselves. I don't know for sure, but I feel like not even just in the black group, that they rank pretty highly as much in just affluence in general, just minority groups. In relation to minority groups, there's just an abundance in the Nigerian community, you know. But the system would be treating them the same because you look at somebody, they look black, a police officer sees black, but their identity and how they perceive themselves, and even my family, like their identity and what they expected from me is like it stems from having that strong relation to being Kenyan, or having that, even though I was raised here, there's that very strong connection, and being like, we know our worth, we know our value, we know where we should be, right? And my parents and that community doesn't identify with with lack, right? They identify with, doing, being the best, and going, striving for the best, and striving for better than what you have. So that's really ingrained in the, um, and it's really too bad because I feel like it just goes back to the social, I mean, not social, psychological warfare that's been done on the black community and the poor white community, just to be, just to have the division, which keeps both of them down, to be honest. And I just realized I look at myself and just me having this mindset for myself that I'll improve myself no matter what it takes to get somewhere. Like after graduation, getting to like making $100,000, I was able to do that, and now when I look back, I'm like, I'm in like one of the highest, like the top percentile of earners in the United States. That's even more than white people. Most white people make less than me. Like that's insane, right? Like what's up with that? That means that, even white people in this way, who are poor are getting kind of the shafted in a sense. Like they're not um, they're also not living to their best potential, right? Even with black people, because of the divisions, the way that division politics actually serves to just put down a lot of groups and maintain power for a ruling class. So I was even thinking about how come I don't know any like black communities today. These things are not put on. Like, what are well-to-do black communities? I'm seeing here, Mitchville, Maryland. The average income in that town is 118,000, and residents in that community have college degrees. They U.S. Naval Academy. They go to all these prestigious schools, and they're not just like Black Beverly Hills, just Baldwin Hill, which is where you get athletes, actors, and all that stuff. So there are black people who are making a way for themselves, but they're not put on the spotlight. I had no idea. I had to look this up. No one knows. But the spotlight is put on the negative and the ills and the very like um, sexy aspect of black culture, like sports and arts, whereas a black person can just go to school and achieve, or start a business and achieve. This is possible. Um, I'd say, despite what institutional things are there, Black people still have an option, and we do have um, a way forward, right? If we change our mentalities, if we address the problems that are the most pertinent, and that means, really believing in ourselves to achieve something. There's no reason I should go to school and be ridiculed by my black classmates for doing well on a test, or doing well, being in a high performance class. This is a mindset issue, which is probably going to hold people back even more so. I wouldn't try to say that there is no institutionalized racism. I think the people who are there are going to act, even if the laws don't say, this or that. They might act according to their prejudices. They might, be empowered to do so. But regardless of that, the spirit to succeed and achieve, whether it's in your own business, or playing along, or trying to be a part of something else, there is a way forward. I definitely think there could be a lot of things to be done to make sure that things, like policing, that these things are, and zoning, schools, all these things that are kind of like under the rug, right? Like it's racism, but without the name, right? Where you try to institutionalize laws. And finally, I will say, with that example previously, where I said that the white supremacists over like did a coup d'état on a city, like these days, the legacy of that is that they try to put in all these, voter registration laws, and try. It's like more gerrymandering in a way to retain their power, right? So these things do occur. I just don't think that we are less than equal to the challenge to overcome those things. And when we do, if we do, we'll have the power to change those things to be more equal. But in the mindset of that we have to wait or find somebody to champion our cause, it defeats it defeats us, I feel. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. I I think as well, now getting a historical perspective of this stuff and seeing what happened with the division of, trying to pit people against each other. That was basically like the plan of a white Democrat Party. It kind of serves that. Because I'm just thinking here, um, like what you're saying here about the fact that black people, yes, there's a difference, and that could be due to the fact that there's more black people in poverty per se than white people, or um, my credit score is pretty great, so I probably get get their approval more. But we can't be. I don't know, but I've never tried to apply. Um, but I was trying to make a point here. Is Yeah, go ahead. Right. I know. I mean, colonialism, though. But colonialism, though. Right, right. I have a radical look at this actually. What I was trying to get to was I'm very skeptical about the current zeitgeist of look at all these black issues. We have to solve these black issues. And especially from the fact that it's coming from a majority of people on my timeline, especially is like white people who are definitely well intentioned. But I feel like there's some kind of manipulation going on here, right? Especially when it's coming from Joe Biden, it's coming from these Democratic leaders, right? Where it's making this race issue large so it can kind of manipulate us, right? What did Joe say? He said, "You're not if you have to think about voting for me, then you're not black." That kind of showed his hand to me because for a long time. So my radical uh, thinking actually is more like these the Democrats and people in power who claim to be championing black issues and the black vote. Classically, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton himself, even Barack Obama to an extent, etc. have always championed this platform where they might say nice things. They don't make any overt promises about what they're going to do about anything. And once they get in, all the it's nothing really happens for for the change, and we can't really point to any significant changes that these democratic leaders have done. And to be honest, like we look at Joe Biden's voting record, and he's the one putting the freaking police on the streets and funding them to be militarized and respond in this way, but somehow he's the candidate who's supposed to be the one that we champion. I think it I think it has been actually a vie of manipulation. And going back to that, you guys have to check out that Vox thing. It said when a Democratic government was overthrown in the U.S., something like that. But the guy who overthrew it, right? The guy who literally um, imposed himself, like put himself as the mayor, stated himself as he put, like they wrote to him like, oh, he was a great friend of the black community. Him, of all people, who was calling for the lynching of a man at some point in that whole situation. So I almost start seeing it as a similar thing that's going on, because the black vote is not really it's you can't really use leverage, right, with the black vote. The black vote always goes to the Democrats. If black people if the black vote was willing to be like, hey, look, we might vote Democrat, we might vote Republican, you guys, let's see what you have to say about our issues, you know what's on the table, you know what I'm saying, and not being like, because of this very emotional thing about racism, emotional baiting, right? And it becomes another identity thing. This guy used an identity argument. If you're not if you aren't black, if you don't vote Democrat, right? And I'm like, that just showed the respect that they have for the black vote. Like, look, you're gonna vote for us anyways, but you're gonna vote for Trump. All right, look, we should, as a black community, sit back and be like, look, we might, we might. So we just want to see what are you gonna do for me? And the Oh, for sure. I think because they would. The only reason my parents don't vote for that is because Democrats are ideologically supposed to champion rights for blacks and rights for immigrants, etc. Right? So that's the thinking, right? But even just the broader black community is, if you talk about traditional black thought, is quite conservative, right? We're like there's a very conservative mindset, like support for gay rights in the black community is probably not went as far as maybe the newer generation, but for my parents and older people in the black community, probably since a lot of them are very staunch Christians, right? Black churches are very staple. Like that's where the black community organizes around the church. Reverend Martin Luther King, right? Minister Malcolm X. It's all around. It was always around religion, which is already going to put us probably in a classically conservative mindset. My parents would definitely not vote for. They're definitely against abortion. They're definitely against all these classically conservative things. But because the Democrats have positioned themselves in this way, you're not black if you if you don't go blue. And that's done us a great disservice, because that means, if you can't really get anything if you don't have leverage, right? If they don't think that you can act differently, you'll vote in people who end up doing nothing for you. And that's a very weird situation we find ourselves in. So I've been very skeptical of this movement. It seems like they're trying to avoid a grassroots leader coming up, and they're like, oh, here's a movement. Hey, black people, this one's a safe, good movement for you guys to use so we can like manipulate it. And, so nice and decent. Like if most white people are supporting this and it's vilified even at work to have a counterpoint to it, I get skeptical. I get skeptical of where this is really coming from, right? So is it our movement or is it an agenda right now to use this as a platform to dethrone, you know, the Trump committee, right? I mean, the Trump, what's the word, cabinet, or yeah. So that's my radical take on this. That I feel like it's a form of redlining almost right now. I That's just how it feels right now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it almost seems like you're fucked on either side because look at the people who run. They're all billionaires or millionaires in their own right. And then ultimately who loses, right? Obama is gonna bail out your company just as and Trump is just as likely to do that no matter what you do, no matter what missteps you take and mismanagement, there's a government that will always bail you out, right? So how are the politics actually leaning when we actually look at behaviors of each administration? They end up, if you're telling me a Democratic president is just as likely to increase police militarization as a conservative one, then who are we really against here? Both parties seem to be like not not having my interest. It, token issues. That makes a big yeah, that is a big point there because yeah, that's what I've been saying with this movement. This is great, right? We're talking about this stuff, but is past rioting and breaking things. All right, you've made your point. This is very significant. But what comes next, right? Are you guys gonna like? Clearly, you're not gonna overthrow the government. Like you're not. You guys are not ready to have a violent revolution. I'm sure of that, right? Um, Now, and it'll like that'll be a net loss in this case. There's just too much powers, China, Russia. Like we don't want that for the United States. Dividing us will, right. There's a lot of shit going on. Us being divided works against us right now. Right. we were literally talking about what role did Russia play, right? What role did these governments play in hijacking our internet and seeing what people see as ads, etc. Now we have movements in which can literally be blasted, and the most negative aspects of those movements can be put out there to just continue to to stoke civil unrest, right? It's like the weak spot of the United States, the kind of thing that we hadn't fully addressed, right? And so I was like, if we're gonna really like keep this momentum of like, okay, we've made a hard stance against nobody should have their life snuffed out like this. How can we vote to make sure people are in power that represent that ideology, right? Is it just going to dissipate and then we made our point, we spray painted some buildings and that's it? Or how do you organize around these issues, right? What's the voter block and what's the, because at this point we still have two presidential candidates and that's it. And those are the people we're putting on and they don't seem to be representing it. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, I missed that. Dude, I do not envy police officers at all. Like that's a shit job, man. Especially when you're in the inner city, when you're in particular areas of violence. I mean, even in when I was in Winona, I was just talking to some officers. He's like, imagine, you're just always coming to the worst shit. You're rarely meeting people at their best. You're usually called when you're called, people are just acting, you're just seeing the worst displays of humanity day in, day out. So the bad interactions. So So in that case, it's like even if I was looking at Minneapolis and how they're like, okay, we're gonna abolish the police department. I understand like that's been done before. Otherwise, before I was like, what? You're not gonna have any police? It's like, okay, they want to restructure it. All right, let's restructure it. You're gonna have a community force. Um, what's to stop those people from becoming the same people that you kicked out, right? Because as they say, you stare into the abyss. You can't, every cop movie I've seen, not to say movies are reality, but are imitates life, right? What police like the successful police in those movies tend to be the ones who act like criminals. They bend the law a little bit to for their sense of justice, right? for to do the things that they can, even when you're watching it, it's a plot, but you're watching it like, yeah, he bent the rules a little bit, but that guy was really bad, right? And is that the case of what's going on? Does a doughy, bright-eyed police officer who expects the best from humanity, is he going to be effective, or is he just going to be taken advantage of? So I think these are definitely difficult discussions to have about the police as a black person, because we tend to, as much as we're cartoonified as gangsters and just people who want to fuck shit up, we also see police as just people who come and want to like oppress you and just, you know, uh, just be a dick for the sole reason that they have the power to be one. And there's probably a lot more nuance in these situations where we have that black cop who killed the white lady in Minneapolis. Like, what kind of person are you to be on edge? That somebody comes up, shit, you shoot him, right? Isn't that PTSD? I think that's PTSD. Maybe a lot of our cops are suffering from literal PTSD from dealing with that shit. What do we do to also address that, right? Because bring it back to Psychopaths, my last comment. I don't know if you've seen that anime, but Psychopaths is in that show, the people who enforce laws are latent criminals, right? And I think that was a critique to show that, the people who are going to become law enforcement or effective at law enforcement know how criminals think. And you can't tell me that's not going to seep through. That's not going to become who they are. I was telling my friends who might be involved in getting illicit materials. I'm like, hey, it must be free season right now to get whatever you want, because the spotlight is just not on you right now, right? um, do you What is the role? Like, police are such a hammer, though, right? Like, you're giving somebody a gun to go give a speeding ticket, right? Is that good? Like, why do we have police? I feel like there is a good um, And I think police even will say that, huh? Right. Right. Oh, my argument is more people are making the point that we're using police for too much. And I think police will even agree with that, that look, I'm not supposed to be called to settle the dispute between you, like I'm here with the, yeah, like I'm not here to be fucking catching your cat, you know what I'm saying? Like this is not what police are here for. And right. You're sending in somebody with a gun to probably solve some simple civil dispute. You think if people get frustrated and tempers flare about something meaningless that people can't get into a fight, they didn't remember the Shakespeare thing of like someone flicks their teeth and causes a whole ethnic war. Like I bite my teeth at you in the summer. This caused like the Romeo and Juliet thing. I'm like, art imitates life, and this is stuff that happens, and because these people are people, calling them in to simple matters seems. I feel like that's probably one obvious thing that should be done, and I feel like there's probably an agenda. Um, for me, having my conspiratorial mind, I always feel like police they're they're mostly there to protect the elite's property, right? Like you're supposed to protect, make sure corporations can do businesses, and that is my thinking. More than saving anybody, you have to keep order so business can continue. It's not, more saving life. That's not the first agenda. That's just me speaking conspiratorially, right? Just seeing how how it's been and what agenda there might be for people with billions and millions of dollars to want more and more police to be on the ground, right? More and more militarization. If there is an uprising eventually with people becoming disgruntled, not just with race relations, but generally what's been going on in the country, right? Generally, the fact that it seems like every generation is being worse off than their parents, right? The fact that the American dream seems like a story, like a fairy tale now, right? That these things keep like happening, like, and getting the country off the rails. As a person who has a lot of shit, you probably want a lot of force on the ground to make sure you keep your shit. And that makes me feel like that's the agenda here. Right. Is it that you are trying to keep people safe because apparently, this is causing a rise in violent crime, or is it that you want to keep your, your own stuff safe? You want to make sure that there is a highly militarized force you can call on when the People's Revolution finally occurs, and like, crack crack down and make sure you can continue to rule, right? To continue to rule. And that's just me taking it really far. I don't know. There's probably a lot of hyperbole there, but mm, Yeah, I thought that was the deal there. Right. Right. It wasn't the story that they had to reapply for their jobs, like they were automatically given it because I thought that the argument with the police unions is that the police unions have so much power to make sure that cops don't get really any consequences, right? Like, right. Yeah, that's crazy. I think the argument on their part might be, if you were ever going to make an argument, is that sometimes cops have to make difficult decisions in the interest of a greater sense of justice, and we don't want to. Is that the argument? And that's why the police want to protect. You know, the police unions also seem to, well, I don't know if you guys watched hopefully this isn't to digress on this point, but if you watch the Chappelle special that just dropped last night, you haven't seen it yet? No, no problem. He does bring up something that had happened not too long ago. Do you guys remember Doan? What's his name? Something Doan. He was like this black LAPD officer who went on a rampage of cop killing, right? Because you gotta remember that. What was it? Like, do you guys need help? Because look, I'm not the one. But in Dave Chappelle's representation of his story, which I remember when it happened and being like, holy shit, somebody's. Anyways, I remember being like, holy, this is crazy. This guy went full. This is a movie, you know. But uh, I don't remember the facts as to what led to it. But Dave Chappelle represented it as this officer, Chris Dorner, was part of the LAPD, and he sees his female officer like kicking a handcuffed suspect in the head. I might be even misrepresenting Dave's, but it was an act of violence towards, just right, and yeah, something like that. And so Chris decides to do the right thing of what we would be like. Cops should hold other cops accountable, and a lot of people have been calling for that. People are being like, "Look, don't let your fellow officers be dicks." And he reports it, and he gets fired. And the LAPD, I'm sure, is gonna probably bring up something else. It's like, no, that's not the reason we fired him, etc. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt that that's why they fired him. And apparently, Dave goes on to say that he tried to get his job back, went through every avenue, legal avenue, but with what I would right. What I would think is the police union in this case, or police, just basically shadow banning him, not probably blacklisting him. I'm too much of a nerd. um, blacklisting him from getting his job back, where people literally, kill me. Like there's people like this officer apparently has a rap sheet of incidences, and he still has a job. And there was a New York Times article that had come out with all these people who had committed some heinous crimes as a police officer and got reinstated or still have their job or still in the force. So the fact that immunity only works one way, right? Like only works to serve. Well, it could very well serve cops who had good intentions and had to do something fucked up to get a result that was ultimately good, utilitarian, maybe. But the fact that if Chris Dorner's situation is to be believed, that the culture of the police is to um, be so uh, loyal to each other that it supersedes their duty to the public, that's a problem. There's like nothing we can do then. Do like even the laws that we say, hey, police, you have to do this. Wear body cams. There's nothing that we're gonna do to reform the police if they won't hold themselves accountable and they've lobbied to have laws that make it so that even if they fuck up, no one's going to come down on them for it. No one's is th- is there any good examples of a police force in a country that is at least better, like at least it has a better, the bad thing is a lot of these communities in which we would, how do we quantify it, right? A lot of these communities in which these things come up, though, is they're homogenous, right? Where they're like, oh, Japan, they don't have crime and blah blah. Well, these homogenous and the things, right? Right. It is. It might be a unique situation in which we have to navigate. Yeah, that is. I look at the cops. Um, I try to look at the cop side of this in um, I guess when you're always called to these violent situations and you have been trained, and talking to some cops who I knew when I went to college where people were training to be cops, it's like the training is more to protect you and it's almost like military, right? You have to make sure you protect your guys. Don't put your guys at risk, right? Anything that you do is like if you come in to a hot situation without your gun drawn, you've put your fellow cops at risk, you know? So there's like this trigger thing. And like, I was thinking like, man, this starts becoming like a gang, like the same kind of like code of silence and brotherhood that, we have the literal, uh, what is it, the fraternity, the exactly the fraternity brotherhood of the police. There's something like that, um, and that makes them like more loyal to each other than what they're there for, and it becomes almost like you know a mafia or a gang that's just state sanctioned. And I'm not sure what, like, I think um, the job of law enforcement inherently will breed this kind of behavior in individuals. It will, um, and it's unfortunate that this behavior takes on a form that is perhaps racially motivated. And I say that just because, um, classically, this has been the case, especially in southern communities, but in even in Minnesota, we had we have lynchings that have happened there. And where were the police, right? So if this has been in the culture and then a law changed in the 60s, that's one person ago. My parents were born in 63. You know what I'm saying? So like, did the culture just like they get together and be like, all right, guys, we're not going to be racist anymore. Starting now, everybody stop being racist. Everybody change their mindset. Don't teach your children anything about what you've experienced. Right. Yeah. We're installing patches to everybody's police update. Like, of course that didn't happen. And there's elements of it. Um, but being met with a situation in which it's your life is on the line, it's you're dealing with negative aspects of humanity, and you probably will naturally attribute it to what's there. It's funny, and I hate to bring this up because it kind of derails a lot of the cause here, but um, I have a lot of Kenyan friends on my timeline who live in Kenya, and while this whole thing is going on in the United States about police brutality, etc., Kenya, a homogenous country, mostly Kenyans, is talking about police brutality in Kenya. You know what I'm saying? Which makes me like, ah, shit. Like, now this is kind of like I'm trying to argue about, like, oh, these police are so fucked up, but perhaps the job of a police officer is one that just invites these kinds of people, these traits to be expressed in people. You're like you said, you give them a little bit of power, uh, and a police officer has a lot of power, having monopoly over violence. People run with it, and apparently, in Kenya, they've been saying that the police are trying to enforce the curfews and the quarantines to such efficacy that they are killing more people than the disease is actually. Um, so, but that's a country in which is all black people. Something can be said about the tribalistic makeup of, like, look, maybe the British made it in this, like, set the boundaries in a way that put people who generally didn't get along. You can make some cases, I'm sure, but still the case of these are black people seeing black people, and it is very hard to tell, even in Kenya, oh, that guy's from this tribe and this guy's from that tribe. On face value, you probably wouldn't know until you hear their accent or whatever. And a lot of people in the city probably not. But we have to innovate on this whole law enforcement thing. And I think there's a deeper problem which has manifested itself in a race issue, but the deeper problem of giving a group, the monopoly on violence over everybody else, and then trusting them with the, hey, use that as you see best fit, and then saying that, hey, if you fuck up and kill somebody or do some things that are regrettable, yeah, it's okay. It's fine. Look, you're too important, right? So I think that I think that's through this conversation. That's where I'm coming to, like, my thinking on police. It's like there there's probably a deeper issue here, past race even, as what should be done in these institutions. Hey, shout out to Patrick Connaughton, man. I always feel safer when I have a white friend with me when traveling. I'm like, I always do. When I'm in a car full of black people and I'm like, oh shit, if we get pulled over, this is gonna suck. If we have a one white friend in there, especially if he's in the driver position, I have a better, I have a better like feeling about how the interaction will go, you know? Not only just because maybe the cop might be more lenient or treat us more fair. Um, Also because, and this goes to show, like anybody who says that, oh, that was forever ago and things have changed and get over it. The fact that black people are still afraid when these interactions happen means that we still harbor these beliefs. How do you believe they don't, right? Like, how do you think that we're people, man? Like, these things have just happened. We've been consuming the same information, right? So these things are available, they are in our psychological, our collective psyche when the interaction happens. So as much as we're afraid of them, they probably have some fear of how this will go and predispositions about, oh, a group full of inner city looking youth who are black as well. Hmm, what's going on? Right. You get hit with police statistics. It's color. Right. Right. Yeah. That one was the statistic I had the most trouble believing because I was like, well, of course they're gonna say when we did something wrong, but how well? Hmm. Yeah, where I had a problem with the statistic is that I wonder how many killings of black people are actually reported to be as such, especially since there's been a narrative that is going to say a lot of Republican pundits have been saying that, oh, George Floyd died of natural causes, had nothing to do with the knee. Um, so, like, would that in a vacuum, would that have been attributed to this officer? Even now, I wonder if the statistic is counting that as a mortality, a death by a cop, or are they saying, well, the coroner said this, so we're gonna say this is how it got reported. Right. So who's going, right? How, right. So how is even the, like, I'm wondering, it calls into question a lot of the cases that happen, even the guy who got choked out in Staten Island, Eric Garner. Does that get counted as the police killed him? You know, are these, right? Because yeah, the cop was not charged, right? Like the cop won that case. So that means that did he kill the person or did he not? So So I would just question, at the end of the day, if these statistics get, are they based off of what the cop reports? Is it a police report? Because there has been reports even of, there's one case I can pull up where the police beat the shit out of a suspect who turned out to be not the person they were looking for, and then they charge the individual with bleeding on them, right? So is that, you know what I'm saying? Does that, like, are these statistics that get counted? Like if we can have a case like that, one reporting like that has to call into question what kind of oversight is being done in these police reportings and how much of them are just being like, hey, officer, what happened? Well, he bled on me, I guess, and yeah, he was resisting, and why, like, wouldn't you have a like? There's already a conflict of interest when you're asking one party, right? And since I think for me to be like, okay, this is a very valid statistic, I have to know that an independent source or some kind of validation was done because you're literally asking a person who has a vested interest. So yeah, I guess with the Washington Post, I liked your earlier one of, I don't know, is that the same people who are doing the crime? I think you said it was somewhere where they ask everybody involved what went down. Right. So if it's that case, then I'm more inclined to be like, all right, at least you got more opinions on the case. But I'm inclined to believe that the Washington Post might just look at the police report too, or just like what are they doing? I don't know their process yet. Right. If it is the case, if it is the case that they've done their due diligence to make sure that these weren't skewed in any party's favor, then all right, yes, I'll concede that point for sure. That we can take that statistic and have to confront it. But for now, I'm a bit skeptical of of how how many officer deaths are happening in relation because in relation to officers killing others, because I personally, if I could find a way to get out of it and I could say I didn't actually kill anybody, I probably would say that. I'd probably be like, I found him dead. I found him dead. He was already dead by the time the bullets, you know? So, like, like the Breonna Taylor thing, I don't know, is like who's the one it's attributed to, and I don't know. I I need to know more about how these things are reported. Um, so I just had a problem with that statistic. Can I bring up a interesting way to look at this? In the court of law, we assume um, a person is innocent until proven guilty, right? That's sometimes right, you're right. But that's the basis of American law, right? And Republicans stand on that a lot. It's like I guess sometimes people use it for their own agenda, right? But but that's what's supposed to be presumed is that the person's innocent until proven guilty, and that's to prevent even if and there has to be enough evidence to prove that they are right. The burden of proof, the burden of proof is always upon the prosecution, right? So that's to say that the belief is if we um, if we end up because of that letting some people go who were actually perpetrators because we didn't have enough evidence, that's better than letting somebody who was not actually guilty that's the belief. It would be better to let somebody who is innocent. I mean, it would better to let somebody who is guilty free than to jail somebody who's innocent for a crime, right? That they didn't commit. That's the belief in that. So when we're talking about cops, even if this statistic is true, I was thinking about this, and we could discuss it. This is just a whim. I was thinking um, isn't that what we should see, right? Because cops being now given that license to kill should be already they should be hesitant to use it, right? They should express more restraint in using it, right, than what we'd expect from a criminal, right? Because everybody who kills an officer is a criminal, right? Unless I don't know what statistics they have on somebody who's just defending their house. In that case, I'm like, well, yeah, maybe you should have knocked. I don't know, like in the Breonna Taylor case, of like who, like I don't know. But anyways, if we're talking about that, a cop came to a violent situation in which criminals were there and they end up getting killed, um, those people are criminals. We expect the worst from them. But the fact that we are having um, um, officers end up killing unarmed individuals to what was the statistic? It was, and then the other one was unarmed, and then you said black uh, people were killing. Um, oh no, no, like black people killing police or black perpetrators killing police. Right. So I would. Right. So I was making, I guess that what I wanted to say is I wish I had a clear statistic to be like, so it's 1.8 and the other side is this way. If it's any close number. The fact that it's at close at all. So the fact that cops killing unarmed black people is anything close to the other way around is showing that there's something wrong there, right? Like you, black officers having this kind of percentage, and if it's comparable to criminals killing officers, if it's comparable at all and close at all, then it might lead me to believe that this is kind of like a mark against police officers because they're supposed to be held on to a higher standard. We've given them the right. We've said if you kill somebody, even by accident, we are going to give you some kind of qualified immunity, right? Because we trusted you to make the decision. So we're trusting you to, on average, make the right decision more than you make the wrong decision. So if there's a percentage that you're making a wrong decision just as much as a criminal is, you know, is if you're like comparable, if the numbers are comparable to bad decisions by criminals, then that that's fucked up. But I don't know if that's what the data is saying. I might be representing it incorrectly. Yeah, yeah. I just like thought of a counterpoint to myself also is that if we if we do handcuff police too much though, then we do risk like that situation in which this might be a bad example, but there was the whole thing of like, the consent movement, right? We have to get consent, blah blah blah, right? And then people would always be like, all right, so I'm gonna have to have this girl sign a document and stamp her name here before I'm able to do anything, and I have footage recording that I gave her consent, right? So, so what if a police comes upon a situation in which it's danger, like people are in danger, right? Um, will will the crackdown on police or us being like, hey, you have to exhibit a very high, degree of uh, right. You have to be very careful in your decisions, etc., and do your diligence before you engage. And then this crime, they're like, oh well, we have to wait and figure out what's going on. Let's wait for backup and make sure we have somebody here. We have to wait for the third party to make sure we're doing our jobs correctly, and now we can engage. And like the kid's already been killed, or whatever situation, because we're trying to due process. And that goes back to psychopaths, which was the problem with those police, which they had to wait for the AI to be like, you know what? Yeah, now you can save this individual, or you can stop this from happening. Right. So like, is that what we're risking here? And if that is what we're risking, is it worth the sacrifice, right? If more people are, if less unarmed people and less people who would otherwise have been killed with a cop who made the wrong decision, if we handcuff them more, but then that lets out a lot more, that causes some egregious things to happen that could have otherwise been countered by a police force that is a lot more free to make a judgment, right? I think that is the difficult part of where maybe somebody might argue for qualified immunity. I think people would probably respond to you in that it's not just that this is occurring. If we say that it will occur and we can't expect it to be zero, where's the justice for the individuals? Why isn't the cop being punished, etc.? But there are some situations in which things get nuanced. Like you saw the Washington situation in DC where the old guy gets pushed over um, and cracks his head open, and people are outraged that the police would do this, etc. And I was even like, God damn, dude, that guy's 75. What's wrong with you? Now the police, a bunch of them, you remember the retaliation to that the police took is that they all resigned, right? That task force all resigned because they felt that they were told to do something and they did it and now they're being punished, right? And right. So I guess on the other side, it creates those situations in which um, cops feel like, look, I was just doing my job where I was told to do this. I was told to clear the area. I didn't, and they told me to make sure these guys are out of here. And I didn't mean to hurt this guy. It seemed like the guy, and this I think goes to tell more about the situation. The guy gets knocked over, and the guy who knocked him over, he's like, ah, shit. He goes over, but then the guy, yeah, he tried. He's like, oh, should I get him? And then his officer go, you have a mission, and it's like, holy fuck. There's a situation in which the system or like the process that they're given a mandate, do this, follow orders, and they can't even express basic humanity, right? They can't even express basic humanity in service of the mission. So how do you judge that situation in which also in that case, I want to make sure you don't miss the point that he brought up that case in relation to the Chris Dorner, in that they were handcuffed also because going against your fellow officer in his decision might get you fired, even if it's justified in like, hey, dude, like you don't need to choke this guy to death, right? You've broke the police fraternity, yeah, you broke the blue line, and now that could end up losing your job. And in the other case, you could lose your job because this guy went overboard, right? He goes overboard, you get filmed, and now you're facing criminal charges along with the guys who were with what do you call it, George Floyd, right? They're facing criminal charges. as well by just being around and letting it happen, right? Whereas, damn, I wonder if they were thinking like, fuck, dude, like this guy's begging for his mom, but I can't betray my brothers. Like that's a fucked up, like, we definitely have to like figure out a way in which people like police are like can act, can be free to not be handcuffed by also that force. Yeah, that force too. There's pressures on both sides. That's why I said I do not envy I do not envy this position. How people choose to become cops is always beyond me. Like I'm like if you're a well-meaning person who who wants the best in life, why would you want to be an officer? It seems to just put you in a very terrible position in a lot of cases. And the easiest route is just to become a corrupt one, just to look out for yourself and play whatever situation will have the most benefit for you, because it always seems that damned if you do, damned if you don't. Holy fuck. I I realize we've just almost said that the yes, unarmed black people, or people who've come victim to police violence are are victims, but also police officers are all being actually, um, like, I don't want to use the word oppressed, not the right word, but they're actually being hurt by this system. Both the pressure to of the orders and how police training has been done, and the expectations of the culture, right, handcuffs them to not even be able to express their basic human, you know what I'm saying, basic human. Right, right. So it's like that situation creates them to act as they do, and then they do that to individuals who otherwise may not deserve that kind of treatment. And it seems like perhaps then, if we're getting to the root cause of this, I mean, this culture not only needs to change. We talked about black culture and how maybe that need to change, but also policing culture needs to have a big change. And how to do it is always going to be, I'm like, I'm just pointing it out. I don't have any solutions. Isn't that where The Wire took place? Isn't that where The Wire took place? Baltimore? Is that the? Oh shit. Yeah, and yeah, that is wild. Man, you gotta watch Watchmen after this at some point. It's just so relevant. Did you watch the series? The series came out recently, and it was so weird that it happened. Like we watched that like 2019, and then it literally happened. Like we're in mass, and now we have police unrest, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? This is the element of people wearing masks when they're outside, and then also now this police race war kind of going on. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, it did turn out to be prophetic, but there is that example when you watch it eventually of like an officer having the Ku Klux Klan robe in his, as a part of his legacy. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, holy fuck, that's one person ago. you know, like these ideas, and I've always felt like Jesus, like it's gonna take time, and of course, we have to do what we can in the present to mitigate the the damages of what's falling out just because of the people we are and the trauma, right, that's happened to the black community, the trauma that happens to police, right, both white and black, because apparently a black person is just as traumatized and can just hair trigger kill a white person who's coming up to ask a question. Yeah, that could be explained by a number of ways. I looked at that statistic and my gut reaction was to be like, well, the other thing of like how well is this being reported? But then also there's a culture thing of like maybe a black officer feels less handcuffed to how it is, like the white guilt that there is, if you want to explain who's the perpetrator, right? If I'm a black officer versus a white officer, probably if I'm a white officer, I'm going to be like, there's a person here, he's urban. The black guy's gonna be like, yeah, there's a black dude here. He doesn't feel handcuffed by that. And I don't know if that translates to how, like, if they're gonna feel or be hesitant about taking action in a situation. Hmm. Right, everywhere. I think I am a bit skeptical of it, but if it's the case, I can see why, like, maybe a black person might be like, right, right. 'Cause that's true. Yeah, that is true. The perception definitely goes both ways.
at least their inception was from the
ostensibly
yeah,
anti-police
yeah,
brutality.
exactly. Although even then, to counterpoint my own argument, the Black Lives Matter hashtag didn't actually take hold until the George Zimmerman case, and George Zimmerman was not a police officer.
Right.
That would, but mean symbols and codes, they'll mean whatever they mean in relation to who you're talking about. Which again, I just wanted to point that out in the sense that we're juxtaposing too many things upon one phrase, and I think that
creating conflations.
Yeah, exactly. And when that happens, that it emboldens people who already are bad faith actors to begin with.
Yep.
So I would say that if there is one aspect of your whole thing that did make me take negative pause to the perception of it, was that.
Sure.
Because people with way more negative considerations than any of us can just run with that.
Yep.
It's like, oh no, my friend Chris, he's a very moderate guy, but even he sees it. You know what I mean? That kind of situation, and then slowly but surely it just devolves from there. Because you're one guy. You know what I mean? You have this particular way of thinking, but then you're not so atypical from the rest of, like, let's say, your culture or the general population.
Sure.
As a whole.
I'm still a product.
Yeah, exactly. So because of that, one can only imagine how many other people have that exact same type of negative juxtapositional consideration when it comes to even the concept of Black Lives Matter. It's so easy to just stopgap the thought when you're like, well, I mean, it's your fault. Look at it. I think that's what Kevin was also coming from in terms of just the foundational aspect of the post.
I would like to even touch on what you said earlier about the fact that we are all socialized the same way, and this is something I'm always afraid to bring up because it is weird, because I think generally because of the way, like you said, your family had a perception of people and they had a perception of you
5,000 miles away. Yeah.
Right. And this is true when African communities come into the United States. There's usually a tension between Black Americans and Black Africans because Black Africans tend to see what the reports on TV and these people are violent, etc. And that's like a definitely something that we don't talk about a lot because it looks bad, but that happens from communities like the Dominicans come in, even though they look Black, they have that look. I'm not Black, I'm Dominican, and these people are violent, and so there is that kind of thing that happens. But I think even furthermore, it happens even to African Americans themselves, and I have a unique perspective just growing up in it. If I'm a Black person, am I on edge if I'm in a train, with a bunch of white people I don't know, or a bunch of Black people I don't know, or you know what I'm saying? And I feel like the thing that we don't talk about a lot is that white people and Black people's reaction in those situations are quite similar. We are, because we've been socialized and shown images of violent African Americans, etc. This is what we expect, and we take a kind of defensive posture against it, and even in my groups of Black friends, we'll be like, if we're rolling deep, we're always concerned about how we're going to be perceived. All of us have college degrees. If someone invites me to a white party, not a white party, if a white friend invites me to a party, right, and I'm coming to his house and I have like 4 or 5 Black guys with me, I'm gonna like, shit, this might not look good, right? And my Black friends will agree, like, this is gonna give them, like, this is gonna make them scared and whatever, and blah blah. This is something we like, some perception of Black people in ourselves that we're dealing with. Even my Black landlord, when I was living in Uptown, after a night out in Uptown, I had some friends over, right? And my friend was getting picked up by his friends, and they rolled deep, right, with a bunch of black guys, and they all kind of came in, congregated in my house, and it's a bunch of black dudes not doing anything, but my landlord, who tended to just pop in whenever he wanted, even though it's illegal, he came over, and then he was like, "What the fuck?" You know? I'm like, nobody was doing anything, but the perception of young black males is that goes further, not even that affects everyone, like even affects us, but also affect white people. And he had a talk with me. He's like, "Whoa, you bring these people, these gangsters to my house," and I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And this is coming from a black person, right? And it's messed up that occurs, but that speaks to a lot of the socialization and the effective like demonization and caricaturization of black males and black people. Like there's only one mode that you expect those people to interact in, you know?
Sure.
There is some hidden quality that multiple of them at the same time together will just activate, that then can lead to like something negative. You know what I mean? Like
white people.
Yeah, exactly.
White people will be okay if it's me and maybe one other, but if it's a lot of us, I can feel the air change of
dynamic suddenly shift completely.
Well, that's the perception, and a lot needs to be done to change that perception, not just for white people, but also for black people and how we see ourselves. And I'm really, I just wanted to make that kind of observation and how powerful that look is. And that might be why cops are more likely, even black cops are more likely to kill, right? Is because they have this perception of themselves, which is not necessarily.
I'm not like that, but I know how they're like.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, I would imagine, just to add to your point, that if you are a black police officer, you're seeking to be an outlier and not perception, right? Be like, like those guys, hoodlums, straight up, like, but me over here, guys, I'm with you, you know what I mean? And I could only imagine that if the demographics, follow suit in relation to the general population of police officer demographics, though, black police officers are a minority, and we all know that peer pressure is a real thing that then can cause somebody to act a particular way in order to be able to then be more accepted by the particular group that they are seeking to be part of.
Sure. Eager to please.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if you're already in a position where, like you said, if you have a black perp, right, you have more feeling as a black officer to show out for your white officers, to be like, no, we're ain't about, we're not about that shit. Like, we handle it because we're police, you know what I mean? And then from there, like the black citizen, just gets the full brunt of the whole blue line at the exact same time. And the citizen doesn't really care. You know what I mean? That's why I feel that, although important to speak about, the consideration of the racial aspect does obfuscate away from the fact that police brutality is just a general problem for the whole population. Because, I mean, it is bad how many black people are killed by the police, but I mean, the numbers are just as high for white people, or higher, and the same for, for all a whole bunch of other demographics. And as citizenry, I mean, I feel like we have to put our foot down in some particular way, but how do we do that then without stepping on the necessary discretion and autonomy that a police officer needs while being out on the beat? And
have you guys ever heard of? Have you guys ever watched a Daniel Tosh stand up where he talks about, I know how to solve police brutality. Only black people can be cops. How about that? That way you can't ever have the
you can't be racist. Yeah,
but
takes the argument completely. Then
it takes it all out of the equation. But I wonder, and this goes to speaking to necessarily, because we do see incidences like Kenya's talking about. There's police brutality here, and these officers are black, and they're policing a black populace. It speaks to that there's already an inherent problem with policing in general that is going to rub up, that is going to invite situations that is just deplorable, right?
Right. So at that point, once again, I come back to the world views. Are we okay with the fact that this is the best we have, and we have to be acceptance of a particular margin of error in terms of all of these issues, from
Definitely not
brutality to police homicide? You know what I mean? Or, I mean, obviously, I mean, when I say constrained and accepting of a margin of error, it doesn't mean that we don't continue to reform,
Sure,
obviously.
yeah.
But at the same time, we don't grow idealistic in our desires to stamp it to the point of be like, it has to be 0%, that no matter the cost.
Yeah.
Like, what exactly is the desire here? Is it a process or an end goal?
That's
of
true.
why
And
this-
I think the issue with black, like policing of black communities, tends to hide, not playing it definitely, but tends to hide a greater problem with just policing, and the fact that a lot of police are involved in crime. You go back to the 1920s. How the fuck was, you know what I'm saying? All the mafias and, doing all these things. It was because the police were on their payroll, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's a position that can be corrupted. And what has changed to stop police from acting as criminals or abusing their power in certain ways, right? I think if we reform that, we should also hopefully get racial reform for free, right? Like we just make it like we make the police as an institution less fucked up. I don't know if you can make anything perfect, but less fucked up, and also that will translate to the policing in black communities, right? And hopefully, I guess the thing that you want to, I think, in the interest of getting the best change or the most change, the most lasting and the most impactful change, we have to not be afraid and not be scared of like saying that this is a bigger issue here, right? The black thing might be hiding a larger corruption that occurs in the police force, right? Because black officers are cops too. And if we made all officers black, and the reason why I brought that up, would it really change a lot of the issues that we have with police? Kenya says probably not.
One blocking point when it comes to just the political.
It might take away a scapegoat. Not to say that's a scapegoat. It might take away a something to blame it on. But there is a fundamental issue here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Well, and there again, we're back to what is the acceptable cost, and I think that kind of it's the same for many aspects in our culture or society. Like, just take for example, like driving. Like, how many car accidents happen per year? But we're accepting we're going to have this many deaths due to car accidents, but people got to get places, so we're going to have driving. We're going to have cars. We're going to have freeways.
Which I mean, not to completely derail the conversation, but it was always the most dissonant aspect to me in relation to this COVID-19 pandemic lockdown, is the fact that if you look at statistics, like we are way more forgiving in terms of so many other areas and avenues of people of mortality in our daily life, that that completely overshadow whatever this pandemic. Even if this pandemic would have been 10 times the order of magnitude that it was already, I mean, it still would have fallen short to other means of dying every single year from just living one's normal life. So I mean, and now that we're kind of getting over that hump, I'm wondering how quickly we're going to be of just being like, well, I mean, X amount of people died from COVID-19. That's just life now. And the same way with the common cold or just the flu. I mean, like, at what point do we, understanding the fact that giving people a monopoly on power, the discretion and qualified immunity, that prong will just automatically give you a margin of error wherein somebody will undoubtedly abuse their power and cause, an issue to occur. Although, if we want to believe the 375 million indifferent or positive interactions, still are overshadowed by the supposedly indifferent or positive ones, right? It's like, how many, like, what are we willing to concede? It's like 375 million to, again, let's just use a nice round number of 10,000. You know what I mean? Like, like horrible instances with the police, let's say, are completely in the wrong. You know what I mean? Like 100%, these police officers, 10,000 of them are completely in the wrong. You're still, I mean, I don't want to do the math right now, but the number of zeros next to that, you know what I mean? Next to that 3.75 will just be huge in comparison to the other way around. And it's like,
how frustrating must it be for police departments that have been honestly making a point? Like, you see some things in which they either they make the police force multicultural, and they actually engage. Right, they actually engage with the community. You see those heartwarming things where they're like playing basketball with the community and stuff like that. And I don't know if those are just like, you know, feel good pieces, or if there's actual change in relations going on in those communities. But let's say that there are.
Again, right?
Let's say that there are. How terrible is it when something like that happens, and it makes me feel like really like bad about social media in general? Because if it is the case, playing devil's advocate, and I don't believe that it is, but if it is the case that these situations are actually a lot more few how do you say that expression? Whatever. Few and far between. and that you know, that these things don't actually happen as along racial lines as we would have it to be believed. And then an incident, because in all of the incidents that can occur, eventually there's going to be a white cop, black perpetrator, a situation that looks questionable or downright egregious, and then we put a fucking spotlight on it because of the history and because it's a really great political piece for a party to really like run on and be like, see, Donald Trump is the enemy and his whole culture is terrible, whereas looking at it like it eradicates the any gain that was done in that community with that police force, right? It's like, ah, shit, this gets like, this highlighted moment doesn't get really passed around, like, hey, we're making a difference in this community, like these kids are having positive interactions with us, and etc. And then this
even
gets,
if the journalist wants to expose it, I mean, how much legs does a positive story ever have? You know, it's like, how far does a positive story ever really get? Because we are just innately looking for the next trigger piece to be able to be like, that's the, you know, that's
primed for outrage.
Yeah, exactly.
And that makes me feel like I hate being manipulated, right? Like I don't want to be used in, especially something that is painful about my history, to be like, oh, look at this thing that happened, you got to vote this way, and then I end up voting somebody in who definitely doesn't give a fuck about me, right? Because I looked at for the negative aspect, the negative pieces that we've had on Donald Trump in relation to race, etc. He seems to be the president who's likely to, you know, repeal the whole, what was Kim Kardashian talking about, the 13th Amendment of you can have slaves only if they're prisoners or something like that. If they're prisoners, you can use them for, you know, unpaid labor. That's fine. Right. Yeah. So Kanye West and Kim Kardashian being able to talk to the president, and I think there has been gains made there. Kim Kardashian is becoming the poster child of getting, you know, people out of jail for shit like smoking weed or having a bit of weed on them. And
what a world.
Like that didn't happen under Obama. I don't know if it did. I know it definitely didn't happen under Bill Clinton, because we just got more police under Bill Clinton. And so am I being used? And I feel like that'd be the most egregious thing that, like, I do feel from my experiences and how I can remember all the experiences. I don't get into situations with cops often, because I'm an introvert. But in the situations, it's kind of been 50-50. A lot of times it just was fine, and then a couple of times I was like, what the fuck? You know, these situations I got into where I'm like, why am I being treated like this? So for me, that paints me to believe that, you know, these things probably happen more often and more egregious. If I was out there interacting, maybe these things would happen more. But if it's not the case, and this is being used as kind of like an emotional trigger to manipulate votes, not only of black people, but also to mobilize a general agenda to get power, then damn, like, and especially if nothing comes from it, that'll be the worst, you know. That's why I've been asking, like, all right, yes, you can somehow justify you burning down businesses, riots happen, white people have done it, whatever, and you've shown that you won't stand for this stuff. Okay, what next? How do we win? How do we get ground here? Because if the answer is voting in Joe Biden, we've lost. Like, there's, you know what I'm saying? Where like, I want somebody to come and like actually have a, like, hey, like, we are actually going to be a voting group because of this. We're going to vote on police issues. We're going to vote to, you know, fund police who like take changes, like to make real changes in the way that they police and the way that they're trained, etc. How do we have a lasting change? Because regardless of what's going on, if we just end up being a token piece to win an election, then that is probably more proof of exactly what we've been fighting against, what the true enemy for both white and black, than anything.
Yeah, and that goes for everybody, man, because I mean, it reverberates all the way to when you put up that piece about the fact that China is trying to use our police brutality, like media situations, as them trying to paint themselves in a better light of being,
and they
like,
have a good point now. We show Tiananmen Square. How many fucking things have they gotten from this?
They got Muslims in concentration camps, literal concentration camps.
Man, they do. Yeah. They do that too. They have the concentration camps, but now they're gonna point at the U.S. and be like, "You guys are hypocrites, right?
Yeah.
You guys are running over protesters and doing all this stuff. So you guys can't wave a finger at us, right? Because they'll say the concentration camps, and then they'll say, "Well, Guantanamo, is it closed or is it not?" You know what I'm saying? Like, well, they terrorists. Well, we consider these people terrorists. How about that? You know. And so it makes us look really bad on the global stage.
We have so many voices that there is no one
state
party.
Voice.
Yeah, there's no one party voice that, you know, because when we say China, we mean China. You know what I mean? Like, that is no joke. Like, we're not saying like, oh, a party from China feels this way and they're trying to mobilize a coalition to change the situation. Like, no, like the entire CCP is just like, no, buddy. Like, look at the U.S. Like, look at how messed up that is, you know? And I mean, it's an old hat, but Russia uses the exact same situation of being like, what's the point of having democracies if a quasi-autocratic position keeps us in order more, you know what I mean, and keeps your officers less, your citizens being less brutalized by institutional, police power, and and they're like, well, like it seems like we're doing just fine, you know what I mean, and it gives full legitimacy to those kind of institutions by just hyper magnifying the issues that we over here as a Republican, democratic, pluralistic country have, that are pretty much innate to what we are. We're like, you can't have so many people actively conversing and dealing with each other every single day without finding some form of conflict. Right. Yeah, especially from a position of institutional power basis where the citizenry is always, a tiny bit below whoever the police officer may be in front of you.
That's a very hot take, man, with the Russia thing, etc., because I feel like that's the larger game that we're missing here, because this year has become a struggle for the soul of this country, not only from our reaction to the whole COVID thing, right? Because we wanted more control. People are calling for more control and order, like mobilize the police, Right. Mobilize the police to make sure people wear masks
Beach.
and
Yeah, right. We can't have that single kayaker out in the ocean.
How dare that
right,
barber,
yeah. Right.
cut somebody's hair? Yeah.
Inform on your neighbors who are not
really?
who are having right like these things are happening. I was like, holy shit. And then now, like, what leads to an autocratic society, right? I'm looking at the unrest now that's occurring and the violence if we could just be a democracy and be like, hey, let's talk it out, let's have some people debate, and the voters would be like, you know what, he makes a good point, I'm gonna with him, and we just as gentlemen get together and solve our problems. But no, we're burning, destroying shit, having fights in the street. And what that sounds like the French Revolution, right? That sounds like the mayhem that comes for that. And sure, you get a revolution and things change.
They were for the monarchy.
Well,
They're killing the monarchy, but they also turned on each other, didn't they? The person
yeah.
who ends up beheading the monarchy ends up being beheaded by the same fucking mob he led,
Yeah.
right? And what
Yeah.
came of that? Napoleon. He comes down with a hard fist and being, I am the revolution. And then he sets the order, right? And establishes a dictatorship. And so even as a black man, even though that these issues are very sensitive to me, right? And I have gone through this stuff, I am looking at the bigger thing here of like, what happens to us as a country though if we end up getting into this mayhem? Are we going to end up causing the rise of a Napoleon, of a person who has to come in and establish order through harsh dictatorship, right? If there's mayhem everywhere, see, there's things I never thought would have happened ever in the United States happening. The fact that they've taken over Seattle and those blocks, and
Just give it over to
Yeah,
them.
the police just literally gave it right over
right,
to them.
these things going on, and just the general mayhem right now is just like, fuck. Are strings being pulled here? Is this us, or is this like being provoked by outside? Like, who's the real enemy? I think right. That's what I've been getting very afraid of, because I just don't want to be manipulated, and it's
I'm right there
really
with
hard to see the enemy right now, because I don't
Yeah.
think any of us really agree with. We don't want police to brutalize us, of course not. We don't want these things to happen, but somehow I'm fighting people who have the same opinion as me, you know? And
Yeah.
Yeah, like how's this happening? Yeah.
for simple things of like, well, you said this and I'm misrepresenting, you know, I like, what's going on to help to get us in this situation, and what
It's one
are
of
we
the reasons
risking?
why I'm on Twitter is because you
Yeah.
look at the reports of the hundreds upon thousands of bot accounts that are out there actively trying to sway, from foreign powers, trying to sway the American populace one way or the other in order to be able to create even a further divide and a schism between each kind of consideration, because they put out conservative and hyper.
Well, we know
and
for a fact China
Yeah.
has dedicated
like
sections of their
propaganda mills, just
exactly.
just creating, just like, all right, you're the conservative side over there, I'm the
Yeah.
liberal side, we'll flip over every 6 months so we don't go insane, essentially. And and it's like, how many of our citizens and our and constituents and people like that are just being completely influenced in their perception by something that isn't even American.
Sure.
Yeah, like you perceive it to be an American problem, and although they might be able to use American faces, in reality, it's all being used in a ploy to obfuscate away from not talking about China's concentration camps. Whatever Siberian situation might still be happening out in Russia that nobody's actively looking into.
Yeah.
I mean, like every single day that goes by, and every single day that we're having this discussion as opposed to that one, I feel like the powers that be win. So.
Yeah, that's the. Well, I'm
Yeah, okay.
muted. Sorry. Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, and that's been my greatest and it's hard as a black person, because I'm like, you want to stand in solidarity, and you want to be like, yes, let's stop police brutality, etc. But I have to also know that these things have classically been used to further political agenda, and I can't let myself get emotionally swayed when there's a larger game here, especially looking globally as to the moves China's been making, and the fact that this has been a global pandemic, and the fact that there's a recession globally happening. People are getting desperate, so people are going to make some desperate moves. And
guess who's got a lot of money? Help them out of those desperate situations.
we're printing a lot of money. Like what? Like everything is prime for a situation that's going to be more than what we asked for, right? And if I'm playing into the hands of a true dictatorship, of a true like if people think this is bad, just wait until 1984 really happens to all of us, right? And that will be really regrettable if we can't see past these things to who's really calling these shots, who really stands to gain here, and are we playing this right? Are we doing it in a way that's intelligible? If it's a righteous cause, can we do it intelligible so that this violence makes sense at the end of it? That the loss of life and property at this point that's happened was for something, rather than it just being violence and then being used politically by somebody who definitely didn't have and you having no agency in it, and ultimately being manipulated and used.
Yeah, our empathy essentially has been hijacked at this point, because you can't feel any one way from first principles anymore, because of the fact that that there are so many potential strings in the back of whatever, again, statistics you might be looking at, whatever kind of circumstance somebody might bring to you of being like, see, this is an obvious instance where like police brutality is occurring. And now you, unfortunately, because you've been bombarded with so many instances of counter considerations,
getting gaslit.
Yeah, we're like, is it?
Yeah.
I can't be in one place or the other anymore. And even when I consider myself at least intelligent enough to see this, and because of that, I feel like I am then hobbled because I can't make a choice, because I see the fact that there's shit smeared on both ends, and it's like, do I want to wear a shit smeared shirt or shit smeared pants? Like, what is that? Like, what you want to do? Like,
I'm just hoping the silent majority can see this we have so many talking heads that seem to drive public opinion and the way things go. Whereas that's why I really appreciate shows like Joe Rogan, etc., where you just get, kind of like, what are people saying? It's like Joe Rogan might be considered, not a regular person, but the people who come out, they seem to speak very candidly. And in a long format like this, you end up stopping to talk about platitudes and things that, are chanted over and over again, and then having to talk about your opinion and things coming out. I came here with the agenda of being like refuting your statements. And it makes me think about, okay, but how do you see it from the policing side of things, and what is really going on here, and having a real conversation about all the elements that are at play here, even foreign, right? And it's too bad because these things don't get put out on social media, but mass media, right? And these discussions and things framed in this way are so fringe, and you have to like go to, very, exclusive places to find a discussion like this happen. Like, this racial unrest is happening, but how does it connect with COVID? How does it connect with the situation in China? How does it connect with the global thing? And what results can we expect here? Can we just march blindly down this way of like, let's get justice for Floyd at any cost and continue to, just raise havoc? Or, and ignore all of these points, right? Ignore all of the other things that might be going on, and actors that might be, like we have to like talk about what the fuck are these BRICS doing? We already know, like even the mainstream media has been talking about what role is Antifa playing in this, right? What role are those people who are laying bricks out? Even black people are like, why are these bricks here conspicuously? And there's
Yeah,
no
weird.
construction around, and they've been being shown everywhere. And what, like, you can't tell if, like, the umbrella man who's, like, breaking into an auto zone,
Oh, yeah,
who the
the
fuck
auto-
is that guy? You know? Does he really care about George Floyd, or does he want to, like, have people start breaking shit? Who stands to gain from this? And this is happening, as Martin Luther King said. He understands why riots happen, but ultimately it displaces the people in which the community, in which in the community in which it happens.
Yeah.
I was looking at the riots that happened after Rodney King, 1992. And there's this black guy just like, what the fuck are you doing? This is I built this, and you're just gonna burn this? You guys don't care about, you know? And like that side has to also be shown. Like that side is like, are we being manipulated here? Well, like who's really breaking shit? Who is everybody who's acting in this? Do we have a unified agenda here? Because if
Yeah, is
it's
everyone
not,
here in good faith?
if it's not, this is all gonna be for naught, right? This is all gonna be for in vain, regardless of
And
how
who
I feel
gains
about it.
from it being for naught?
Huh?
And who gains from it being for naught?
Right.
Like, who gains from either retaining the status quo? You know, when you speaking about it from either a foreign powers perspective or or internally, and also like another issue that I have is the fact that like if you try to implement new modalities and they end up failing, right? Would they then be used as as extra ammunition for, again, autocratic countries to say, look, the citizens don't know
See, this
shit.
failed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you think the citizens know how to be able to police themselves? Like, no, like you need the strong arm of the government in order to be able to actually institutionalize the monopoly on power. Because I bet you, the moment one of these militia people who are actively trying to just watch their streets, like the moment that they kill somebody, that the entire narrative will be flipped over on its head into being like, you see, civilians cannot be trusted to be militiamen. Like, this is the reason why we need police officers and stuff like that. Which, shit, I mean, I agree. Like there's a reason
how long are white people gonna support this BLM movement until there becomes like a new Black Panther Party and they're armed and shit? Because black people are getting armed now. You know, I'm seeing like Christopher, and just like seeing like, oh, like get your weapons, and people are like, well, we ought to defend ourselves. How long is it gonna be where these things start boiling over to like, oh, wait a second, like, are they gonna keep those allegiances? Are they gonna flip? I'm wondering, but it's setting up some really strange precedents. I want to bring up to you this one document that I found that was published by the John D. Rockefeller Foundation, and I'm trying not to get to conspiratorial waters, but the fact is, this is a true document. If you go to their website, you can find it. And they had these scenarios. They were planning for these scenarios that would happen. And this was published in 2012. And one of these scenarios was a lockstep scenario in which saw that the United States would start mirroring China in level of control of their populace, right? In how they would respond. And in theirs, in the scenario, they talk about a fucking virus. They talk about a epidemic that occurs, and China's able to lock down because they're autocrats, and they are able to control their citizenry with efficiency, and they get a handle on it. And the United States just gets overrun with it. But soon the United States figures it out by implementing the same autocratic like systems that the Chinese do, right? And so they're talking about that. And I read this thing like way back when this thing started, like February, and I was like, nah, that wouldn't happen. Come on. And then it keeps on going more and more. It keeps on going more and more. And I'm like, damn, I can't even go outside now. All right. There's no way there's going to be military on the ground though, right? What the fuck, there's military on the fucking ground now. How the fuck did we get here? I'm like reading this document that's just like prophetic in nature almost, and I'm like wondering to the agenda of being like, are we being manipulated? Are we being used here? Are my emotions and the scarring of the black community just being paraded for greater control? I don't know. It seems like it, because we literally mobilized, and when that happened, I was like, ah, fuck, we have lost the plot. Like, now there's literal boots. There's a precedent for military to be in the streets. How long until the second wave of this epidemic hits, or whatever media manipulation
they're already
happens?
saying fall.
And there's already fucking cops and police here. I mean, not cops, military soldiers here. You might as well have them set up checkpoints and check people's vaccination papers. And is this the road? Like, this is me just going on a conspiratorial rant, but is this the road to a 1984 George Orwellian society?
I mean, I can totally understand, though. I mean, if you're the individual writing this report and you do it from a dispassionate position of just looking at the anthropological views of how humans move, it's very easy to then be like, okay, there's a pandemic, there's a lockdown, and the characteristics of the nation are those of self-autonomy and being like, you can't tell me what to do. Like, that automatically clashes with the necessity for a centralized protocol to be able to say, quell X pandemic. It doesn't have to be COVID, it could be anything. Alongside that, you have about maybe a month worth of people actually adhering to restrictions. Then once that happens and more information begins to erode the public's trust about what officials say, because officials are learning it from a day-to-day position just like every other human is, they just happen to be closer to the graphs and the charts. So because of that, one day you hear masks are not okay, then masks are imperative, then you're okay again with not wearing masks, and now we're like, I guess wear masks because how
long until they just clamp down and have one source of truth? They're like, no, this is fucking up our, even with the riots, is like, oh, it's these guys, or it's these guys, or this propaganda comes out about George Floyd, this propaganda comes out about the officer, and is it true or not? Who knows? The information's already out there, and it's already made its mark on the people, right? And how long until people start being like, you know what, we'll give the consent for the government to just be like, you know what, government controls media now. We want one source of truth, because media is, this information thing is causing the problem, and the social media is the cause of the violence and strife that's happening. Yeah. So we need to clamp down. We need to clamp down on all this shit. These things scare me, man. I'm like, damn it.
That's very true. Yeah, because right now we're seeing the fact that we are unfortunately, as a result of its very nature, antagonizing social media here, right? We're saying that is a catalyst for a lot of the incitement of negative feelings that everybody has. Yeah, if a person in power were to then want to be like, well, obviously, if everyone can agree that it's the social media that's causing it, then ban it, and make it so they can, as you said, shadow ban particular words or particular discussions that aren't in the party, that don't step in party line in relation to what we perceive to be the objective truth that can actually be spoken about. It's what is it that we lose in seeking to have the idealized version of a cohesive government that can mobilize their people in times of strife like this, right? It's like, are we better off with the fact that our kind of country will unfortunately deal with more deaths as a result of pandemics like this? But the upside of that is the fact that we, who are still here, live in a pluralistic and democratically, driven republic that allows you to have your voice at any given time. I think we are coming back to the costs, right? What are the costs that we're going to be okay with, and are those costs do they justify
like, are they not as bad as having, you know, are we willing to accept those costs to keep our democracy and freedom, etc.? Because the way that this is going to need very draconian laws to mandate this and that, right? Because
Yeah.
apparently we don't have the mental fortitude to discuss without calling each other, you know, like without fighting each other on an issue, you know, physically, like to discuss rationally and come with a decision and live with it, right? And it seems like people are kind of pushing, at least right now, pushing for a very strong, heavy-handed government that will force police to be good and force people to wear masks during this pandemic and force people to do X, Y, and Z and not entertain any kind of argument otherwise. And we've already seen this with even talking against COVID. Like, I don't think COVID's, you know, that big of a deal. And I'm a doctor. What? I don't care if you're a doctor. You're going to be censored because that's not the party line. We're just going to end up taking that further to just being those people are completely silenced. This is state mandated, and this is what we're going to believe 100%. And I've been coming to the rationality of like, you know what? I don't know how we stop it. I don't know. It seems like this is, maybe we'll just get the government we deserve. Like maybe people have gotten to the point that they need a real, what do they call it in 1984? Big Brother? Yeah.
Oh, Big Brother.
Big Daddy,
Well, yeah, and
Big Daddy
kind of
government,
what
Big Brother.
it seems like. It's like our nation is looking for a father figure to.
Right.
This is what we're gonna do and lay down the law and.
A Napoleon, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
and I mean, you mentioned the French Revolution. I mean, this situation kind of also is reminiscent of like the Weimar Republic in Germany right before World War II. I mean, we had National Socialists versus Communists fighting in the streets. I mean, now we've got Antifa and the far right.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Wow. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does really put us at a crossroads. That's why I said it's like a fight for the soul of the country of which way we'll go,
You're
more
right.
freedom or less. And I've been feeling like, man, the zeitgeist is so against. I don't know if it's that. I'm hoping the silent majority thinks like I do somehow, and is like, you know what? This is not. I can see my.
Consensus, you know what I mean?
Right.
Parsing through, as we said, the statistics and trying to get a better, you know, view as to what, you know, what those numbers actually mean outside of the vacuum of just saying, oh,
Right.
the FBI told me.
Outside
Right.
of talking heads telling us
Yeah.
what to think, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that's the case, and the silent majority just is above like looking at,
Oh.
can look at the facts and be like, oh, what's actually going on here, right? But it feels like to me that the zeitgeist is against, you know, the spirit of the times is against, you know, any sort of like liberal liberty ideas of democracy and self.
Practical liberalism. Yeah, right.
Yeah. That the government was kind of founded upon, right? And I don't know, I've been starting to feel like, well, how do I start accepting this? You know, like, well, people in China seem to be doing better these days, right? People in China are not doing so bad. Maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe this is what we need
The
to.
dog naming room.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
This is fine.
like maybe my Empire uniform will actually look pretty good on me. Yeah.
It's like, hey, maybe we'll force people to stop espousing beliefs we don't believe in, and if they don't, and they'll be in a concentration camps and get re-educated. We'll all be the
they're not
same.
gonna kill 'em,
We'll
right?
all see each other
Yeah.
as Americans. We'll all see each other as Americans, and that's that. Like the Chinese see each other as Han Chinese. What? No, what's your actual ethnic background? No, we're Han Chinese. That is
Oh,
the only
shit.
kind of Chinese. And even those Muslims are Han Chinese. They don't know it
They
yet.
just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
They
That's-
just don't
They're
know.
getting re-educated to understand that. they're not
We'll
saying.
educate them about their identity, right? Maybe it's just the, what do you call it, the quote unquote singularity event that we're approaching towards, right?
From a political perspective, yeah. like a
from a
singularity
political.
in the sense that autocracy can really only be the only way to mobilize hundreds of millions of people. Because
Yeah.
you have to consider that China does work on an order of magnitude 4 times the size of our population. And they have come to realize that the only means of being able to keep all those people in line is through a very centralized means. And we're having trouble with 350 million. You know what I mean? Like, I bet that there is there are party leaders in China that laugh at that number, be like, oh, we wish we only have 350 million people to have to deal with every day. You know, it's like, whoo, that sounds easy. You know, like, they probably do look at the United States and be like, that's an easy mark. We have 1.4 billion people here. With even a 2 to 3% margin of error, you still have the whole situation locked down. You're like, what? 350 million people. And like, propaganda mills.
I just hope, I don't want it to go that way. So I just hope that the birthright of the internet, or the mandate of what the internet was supposed to do, and that is give us a bunch of different opinions to choose from, and that there's not a monopoly on having a voice, right? People can see different opinions, and the best ones we can discuss and have it rise. But that's in an ideal, me thinking people are as rational as I am. That's what sucks. And you're like, does this make sense, or does that make sense? All right, let's take the one that makes the most sense and does the most good for the most amount of people. But I don't know, because it seems like a lot of mudslinging that comes from not a lot of people can have those. So I don't know. I'm starting to get used to the fact. I feel ultimately the agenda is going to be towards this kind of top-down, very strict government controls over media and people, etc. That will be it will be more in the lines of. Actually, it seems like always liberal parties end up being the ones that are. Well, not always. In the Weimar, how do you say, Weimar Republic? Weimar. Yeah, I think the nationalists, the Nazis, were more of the conservative, right?
Because, they were technically right-wing.
Yeah, because you're fighting against communists.
But right-wing and left-wing socialism.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so, true. And so with the French Revolution, I always think about that one more, just because it seems like that revolution happened, and it was espoused on liberal ideas of those people were the first ones who really, for that amount of time, believed in equality and believed in all that stuff and all those high platitudes of what the human ideal should be. They said, you know what, Haiti, you don't have to be a French colony anymore. You know what? Even though you made us a lot of money, we have to stand by our ideals, right? And Haiti took advantage of that. They're like, hey, you guys are the revolution. You guys have to stand for what you believe in, right? And that worked in their favor. But ultimately, it ended up causing the chaos that led to Napoleon. And so in this case, where I'm seeing the liberal ideas could be the destruction of democracy itself. in a weird backwards way.
They won on ideals, right? In the Platonic form of what it means to be free and equal and all that stuff. There's always better. And when your goal is the horizon and not someplace further out there, you can just keep taking it into further and further extremes. Which,
sure.
Yeah.
And the goalposts will constantly move.
Yeah, exactly. And until we eventually have 0% of every negative statistic. And it's like, how do you
We got a comment, by the way.
Did we?
Yeah, Ruth said the simulation is falling apart. Let's just create a perfect leader with AI. Getting back to the civil system.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but at that point, it's like, do you need the AI to be wholly asymptomatic to all human consideration? It's like, is the move to make it so AI morality is then what's passed down in the top-down perspective in that sense? And do we then a priori accept the AI morality as just better because he's their AI?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's fucked up because
are much greater.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The AI
Yeah.
ends up reflecting its creator, because there was
Yeah.
that Microsoft one that just became like super racist. They're like, oh, whoa, like it's like
It's
whoa,
like no thing at all. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
that's not right.
Yeah.
Damn.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Yikes.
Yeah, but we ran this one long, my friends, which was necessary because it was, a lot of points to be had. But I think we're in a position where we should probably just cut it short so we don't end up going into too many tangents. That
There are so
Right.
many tangents.
There's so many things at play.
Aren't kind of like actually like together in some way because we went all over the place.
I think
But-
we've definitely talked about a lot of things that have opened my eyes, and even things that I've just said to myself, like, well, what about this case, right? You know, when we talk about immunity for police, why has it come? Like, sure, it's abused, but what situation in its best ideals is it trying to prevent, right? And so that when we agree that the police need to be reformed, and we want to make it so that less innocent people lose their lives, right? So
Yeah.
we have to make these considerations going forward. And I just hope that we can sit down, other people can sit down, the government, the nation can sit down and talk about these things, and not get caught up in the emotional triggers that end up happening because it's a hot button issue, and be like, this is a good point, but what about this point? And how do we serve the best ideals of what we really want? We want to live in harmony with each other. We want our life, liberty, and property to be protected. So, and we want that equal across the board. So what can we do, right? What can we do to make this a more perfect union, as our the famous words of, who is that? Lincoln. Honestly,
What?
Lincoln. Making a more perfect union.
Yeah,
Or is that Jeff? I can't remember. But
Yeah.
some forefather said that, and
And I would say the same to you. I mean, I've been kind of taking a few notes as we've been going for things that I want to look into, and like you brought some things up, like that town where the white supremacists took over. I had never even heard of that before, so that's something that I definitely want to learn about. And so yeah, this has been a really productive conversation in my eyes. It's always helpful to get additional perspective to it, and coming from white boy that grew up in the whitest suburbia in Minnesota, like, I didn't have a lot of black friends. I don't have a lot of black perspectives to rely on at all. So
yeah, and
I thank you for taking the time for doing this.
yeah, I really appreciate you coming and having this discussion, because a lot of people I try to engage, they kind of like, look, I want to say my thing and I don't want to talk about it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I don't really
Right.
want to defend my ideas.
Get into
Right?
the weeds. Yeah.
Right. Where I'm like, look, you have a very strong belief, and I want to know what's at the root of that, right? Where can we're people at the end of the day. We have the same wants of, like, desires of our 4 basic needs.
Yep.
So, like, there's no reason why we can't come together and see what's the truth in the statements, and where can we agree.
Exactly.
And I like that. My family comes from Africa, and I grew up in New Jersey, so I saw, like, the ghetto. I moved to Minneapolis and saw how black people live in a more suburban setting, and I lived in Andover, which was a very white setting, so I get to hang around maybe people like you, who I was their first black friend. So it's been giving me a lot of perspectives, in which, forces me to be like, a lot of the best friends I made were from that situation, from Andover. A lot of people who opened my eyes to other ways of seeing things. But also, I have the perspective of coming from, those neighborhoods and knowing how they feel. So I know there's a lot of value in interacting with people from different backgrounds, and coloring your perspective to be more informed, right? So
Yeah.
And this is exactly what my whole intention was in the moment that you said you wanted to have a debate and discussion with Chris about this conversation. I was giddy, because this is exactly the whole reason we made this channel, is because I know that there are so many people out that don't have friends that they can just sit down with and speak to in a candid way, that won't see somebody storm out of the room because somebody
Sure.
said something that they didn't like. or because it incensed them in a way that they, feel is attacking them personally or something like that. And the fact that we now have this here, and who knows how many people will bother to listen, but we can at least say that we're not just, at least from our perspective, virtue signaling in terms of just giving out a slogan of what we believe, and then just being like, okay, well, I dropped my bomb, bye bye. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like we're willing to sit there and defuse the bomb with you if it really is like something that is in fact an issue, because it's gonna blow up in all our faces. Yep. You know what I mean? Like that is in fact what is gonna happen. There's one bomb in a sealed room, and you think that just going to your corner of left or right is going to save you, but the bomb's right in the middle, and it's like, and the shrapnel will either kill you or maim you to the degree that you are now a lesser country as a result of it.
Sure.
Indeed, the greater enemies and demons that are at bay are going to devour us all, right? So we better find a way to live with each other, right? Whether it's white people, black people, Latinos, everybody who's in this country, we're in this together, right? And there's definitely something to say about division and how it's typically been used to kind of let like people who are in a very privileged position just mandate shit, because the American dream is getting lost, not just for black people. I don't know if not a lot of us ever had it, but even for whites and et cetera, like there's a lot of situations that are joining to make the United States a worse place to live every generation. It's harder and harder and harder and harder. Now you can't buy a house. People have to live with their parents until they're 35. Like what? That's on both sides. These things are happening to all of us as well. So we have to figure this out. And like Malcolm X said, and the reason why I bring it up again, this was important, was the way that we get there is we have the difficult conversations. You tell me exactly how you're seeing it and what's calling your perspective, and then I can also show you the way I see it, and we can sit down as rational human beings and be like, you know what, let's solve this, because we know the issues that are faced, they're out on the table. We know this is the way, these things are real. How do we address them, and what's going to be working best for all of us?
Yeah, and the fact that you're not just waiting and pouncing to get the other
some
person.
kind of gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. That we're all just in anticipation of you saying something wrong, so we can be like, haha, there you go. There's the clip.
There's
end
the
it, boys. Yeah, end it, boys. That's what that's
YouTube
the whole
clip.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin destroyed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
In a 4-hour conversation, we take 3 minutes out of it. Like that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but. Yeah. Gentlemen, I am very happy that we were able to do this. I feel so much better on the inside just having been able to speak this out loud, hearing you guys, and having this be reverberated onto the hyperspace. And we can only hope that it'll touch other lives. That's all we can really hope for.
All right, man. Signing off, Lethal Introspection crew. Thank you. Glad we got to meet. E-meet. Hopefully COVID doesn't come back for round 2, because it'd be fun to do this in person again for whatever we face in the future.
At least now we have a template as to what we perceive to be the predictions of the situation, and now we can see where the wind's blowing next time we actually get a chance.
Yeah, we do. We can look back on this video and be like, who is
exactly.
Yeah. All right, you guys.
Everybody have a good day and a good night.
Thank you very much.